In a small village nestled between hills, there lived a man named Edo. He was known for his hard work, determination, and an unyielding love for his children. His life, like many in the village, was a daily struggle, yet there was always a glimmer of hope in his heart. A hope fueled by his deep desire to see his children succeed, to give them a future far brighter than his own. Edo had 8 children, 3 boys and 5 girls, and though life had never been easy, he carried the weight of fatherhood with a quiet pride. The early years of their lives were filled with hardship. Edo was a farmer, working the land from sunrise to sunset. He would toil in the fields, planting and harvesting crops, while his wife, Kemi, would care for the children, teaching them the values of kindness, respect, and hard work. But while Edo could provide food and shelter, he knew that it was not enough. He wanted more for them. He dreamed of a day when his children would walk into the world with education, with knowledge, with a chance to change their lives forever. But sending his children to school was no easy task. There was a small school in the village, but it was underfunded, and few families could afford the costs of tuition, uniforms, and books. Edo struggled to pay for even the basic necessities, sometimes skipping meals so that his children could have what they needed to learn. His hands grew rough from years of labor, and his back ached from bending over the plow. Yet he never complained. Every coin he earned went into their education. When his eldest son, Adebayo, reached the age to attend secondary school, Edo knew that this was his chance to start the cycle of change. He worked day and night, sacrificing his own needs to send Adebayo to a better school in the city. Adebayo was smart, driven. He reminded Edo of his younger self. It wasn't long before Adebayo passed his exams with flying colors, earning a scholarship to a prestigious university. The news was like a beacon of light in Edo's life. But Adebayo was not the only one. One by one, Edo sent his children to school. Fola, his second-born, was a brilliant girl with a keen interest in science. She too earned a scholarship, and soon she was off to study in the city. Then came Tunde, the quiet third child, who had a knack for mathematics. Even the younger ones, who were still children when their older siblings left, were enrolled in the small village school with the promise that they would go on to greater things. As the years passed, Edo's children all began to shine. Each of them excelled in their studies. Each of them was on the path to something greater. Edo's heart swelled with pride every time he heard of their accomplishments, every letter they sent home, each phone call when they shared their successes. He would sit on the porch, smiling to himself, imagining the day when his children would return to the village, successful and wealthy, to take care of him in his old age. He had worked so hard for this moment, for this dream. It was all for them. But as his children's futures blossomed, Edo's own health began to fade. The years of physical labor, the endless hours spent in the sun, had taken their toll. He had always been a strong man, but now he found it harder and harder to get out of bed in the mornings. His joints ached, his chest tightened when he tried to breathe, and his heart felt as though it was beating slower each day. Kemi, his wife, noticed the changes, but didn't speak of them aloud. She could see the toll it had taken on Edo, but she too had spent so many years living with the hope of a better life for their children that she couldn't bring herself to address it. He will be fine, she told herself. Just a little tired. He has worked so hard. The future is bright for us all. Years passed and his children completed their education. Adebayo became an engineer, Fola a doctor, Tunde a professor. His daughters too found success. One became a lawyer, another an artist, and the others pursued their own dreams with the tools their father had given them. The village began to hear whispers of their achievements. They were no longer just Edo's children, they were becoming known in their own right. Finally, the day came when they all returned home. Adebayo, Fola, Tunde, and the rest of the children. They were grown now, successful, dressed in fine clothes with new cars and promises of a life far beyond the confines of the village. Edo had waited for this day for so long, but when it arrived, something was terribly wrong. He was not as strong as he had imagined. His body had worn down from years of sacrifice. He could barely stand up when they arrived, his once proud figure now stooped and fragile. The children rushed to his side, tears in their eyes as they embraced him. "Father, we are home," they exclaimed. "You did it, Father. You made this possible." Edo smiled weakly. His heart was filled with love and pride, but it also ached with a deep sorrow. He had done everything for them. He had given up everything. And now that they had come home, when they were finally ready to enjoy the fruits of his labor, he could not enjoy it with them. That evening, the family gathered together for a feast in celebration of Edo's sacrifices. The house was filled with laughter and joy, but Edo sat in the corner, his frail body barely able to keep up with the excitement around him. He watched as his children celebrated their successes. And yet in the depths of his soul, he knew he would not live to see them truly flourish. As the night wore on and the laughter grew louder, Edo excused himself. "I am tired," he whispered to Kemi. "I need to rest." Kemi helped him to his room, and he lay down, closing his eyes. His body was weak, but his mind was at peace. His children were safe. They had made it. They would go on to do great things. But as the night deepened, Edo's breathing became slow and labored. The laughter from downstairs seemed distant, as though it were happening in another world. And in that quiet moment, when all was still, Edo took his last breath. The children did not know at first. It wasn't until hours later that Adebayo went upstairs to check on his father. He found Edo lying still, his face serene, a faint smile on his lips. It was as though Edo had waited just long enough to see his children fulfilled. And then, in the silence of the night, he had let go. The family mourned deeply. They cried for their father, for the man who had given everything to make their dreams possible. They buried him with honor, but they could not shake the sorrow in their hearts. They had come home to thank him, to celebrate with him, but he had already gone. Edo never got to experience the reward of his labor, the joy of seeing his children return home not as children, but as accomplished, successful individuals. He never got to know the full weight of his sacrifice, the way his efforts had shaped the future. But in his last moments, as his children stood beside him, he knew that his life had not been in vain. For in the end, his greatest joy was not in the fruits of his labor, but in the knowledge that his children, the ones he had raised with such love and struggle, would go on to change the world. And though they cried for him, though their hearts broke with grief, they carried his legacy forward. He was gone, but his love, his sacrifice, his dream, these things lived on in them. And so, Edo, the father who had given all for his children, became a quiet memory in the village, a legend of selfless love, who had worked and struggled to ensure that the next generation would have a future brighter than his own.